I was thrown out of my home by my homophobic brother-in-law. My wife's brother has hated me since she introduced me to the family. He's blatantly homophobic and blames me for his sister being gay. Once he even asked if I put a voodoo spell on her because he couldn't believe she'd be a lesbian. At our wedding a few weeks ago, he got drunk and called me a gold-digging whore in his speech, which led to my brother starting a fight. My wife told him she would go low contact until he changed. I had just moved into her home, and while she was away for work, I was redoing the wallpaper in one of the bedrooms, when my brother-in-law walked in and went ballistic. He cursed me out, calling me a effing bee for touching his kids' room. I had moved their toys to the garage to avoid ruining anything, but before I could explain, he grabbed me off the ladder, sending my tools flying. He dragged me out, yelling that this was his room and I had no right to be in there. I yanked my arm away and told him not to touch me, that this was more my home than his. He laughed and said I would never own the house, that it belonged to him and his sister. I knew that wasn't true, as my wife had even offered to put my name on the lease, but I declined since I knew she worked hard for it. When I told him that, he turned red and called me a liar, saying his sister would wake up, repent, and realize I was just a phase. I told him his religious nonsense didn't matter, and if he wanted to stay in her life, he needed to stop being so judgmental. He asked if I was threatening him, then backed me into a wall. I was scared and told him to leave or I'd call the police. Instead, he picked me up. I freaked out and struggled to escape, but he's a big guy. He easily carried me downstairs, dumped me on the lawn, ran back inside, and locked the door. It was the most childish thing I'd ever seen. Furious, I banged on the door demanding he let me in. A few minutes later a squad car pulled up. I told the officers I'd been physically thrown out of my own home, but my brother-in-law greeted them calmly, saying I was some crazy woman trying to break in. When they asked for ID, I realized my wallet, phone, and car keys were all inside. When I explained, they refused to let me in, as my brother-in-law insisted nothing of mine was inside. A nosy neighbor walked over, asked if my brother-in-law was okay, then told the officers they had never seen me before and that my brother-in-law lived there with his kids. I was stunned. To be fair, I hadn't been around much to visit the house until recently, but I found it hard to believe a gossiping neighbor hadn't noticed me moving in all week. The officers told me I needed to leave or I'd be arrested for trespassing. I begged them to call my wife, the actual homeowner. To their credit, they did, she just didn't answer. My brother-in-law looked so smug as I was forced to walk away. It took me half an hour to get to a gas station and borrow a phone. The only number I had memorized was my dad's, so I called him to pick me up. Once I got to my parents' house, I called my wife repeatedly, leaving messages begging her to call me back. When she finally did, I told her everything and said I was done with her brother. I refused to be around him ever again, and if he was allowed in that house, I wasn't coming back. She immediately said she was coming home early, that the house was mine too and that she was cutting him off. We talked for 2 hours, discussing her family and other issues, and by the end I felt a lot better. She asked me to stay with my parents until she got home. When she landed, she called to say she was gathering her family for a talk and wouldn't be answering for a while. When she finally came over, she told me she was now out of contact with most of her family because they sided with her brother, saying he had every right to kick me out. I held her and told her it would be okay. I felt bad for her, but I was so proud of her for standing up for us. Then she asked if I wanted to go home and help toss all of her brother's stuff onto the lawn for the garbage pickup. Now we're finally on our honeymoon, and my wife just got a call from the house sitter she hired. Her brother tried to break in, they called the police, and now he's been arrested. My wife just said, "Good, I'm glad." The mood immediately lifted, and now I'm looking forward to the rest of our vacation.